It's time for this week's episode of Brandon's Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon's Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon's Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the UNC Tarheels head athletic trainer, Meredith Petschauer. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to work in college athletics and athletic training?
Sure. So I was an athlete myself, and I played soccer at a Division III school called the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio. And I was injured and I got a concussion. I banged heads with someone during practice, and she got stitches and I got a concussion. And so I visited the athletic trainer and he took amazing care of me. And that is how I learned about athletic training. And once I learned about it, I volunteered in the athletic training room and learned about how to at first you learn about how to tape ankles and put ice on and those kinds of things. And now we do a whole lot more things that are way more sophisticated than taping ankles and putting ice on. But that's what you learn first. And I learned evaluation of injury. And I just decided that this was something that I really, really enjoyed doing. I thought maybe I might want to do physical therapy at one point in time. But after spending some time in a physical therapy clinic, I determined that I enjoyed being at practices. I enjoyed the initial injury management. Like I really enjoy emergency care of injury. I enjoy helping people return back to participation. So I like rehab, which is what physical therapists do too. I really liked the rehab process, but for me, I enjoyed the team environment. You're a part of this team, you travel with this team, and you care for them when they're injured. And I really liked that part of working with a really highly motivated group of individuals.
What was your experience like getting to study at UNC in athletic training and getting your master's?
I had a great experience. I had great faculty members who were just amazingly smart people and did a great job mentoring us. I had some really fantastic clinicians as mentors who made you feel really safe about asking a question and, well, what if I'm going to make this mistake? And they're right there to help you. And so I had a really great experience and really learned a lot from them.
Of course, after getting your master's, what was that like getting that experience to work at UNC Tar Heels and getting to become an athletic trainer for them?
Yeah, well, when I was hired, I was hired to teach. So that was my kind of main job. I was originally hired to be the clinical coordinator for the athletic training undergraduate program that we were developing. And but for me, I really wanted to stay active clinically. I thought it was really important that if I was going to be an athletic training educator, that I also needed to be a clinician. Because when you think about what we have done for something 20 years ago versus what we do now is really, really different in terms of treatment. We know so much more about rehabilitation and those kinds of things. And so because of that, I felt like it was important for me to be active clinically. And so I spoke with our director of sports medicine at the time and asked if I could be involved clinically. And initially they assigned me to the women's field hockey team. And so I was with the field hockey team for 9 years. I was with them when we won 2 national championships, which was super fun and very, very exciting. My first 2 years were 2 national championships. Then we went the third year we went to the final game and we lost. And I just didn't know how to act because I was like, wait a minute, we don't lose this game. I've been here 2 times already. We won. So that was really, it was really fun. It's really fun. It's really exciting. And just to work with a group of athletes, no matter what sport I've worked, because I've also worked, I worked lacrosse as a graduate student and fencing. I work gymnastics. I work volleyball now. And no matter what sport you work, you are working with a group of athletes who are very, very driven and very fun to be around.
Of course, what has that experience been like, obviously, first getting started and working with the field hockey team?
They were fun. I mean, they were great. They were fun to work with. I learned a lot about field hockey. Every sport that I have worked with, I've had to learn more and more about the sport. So I learned a lot about field hockey. Fortunately, because I played soccer, field hockey and soccer are somewhat similar in terms of the overall strategies. And I mean, obviously the rules are different and those kinds of things, but a lot of the play on the field and those types of things is fairly similar. And so that was a little easier for me to learn, because one of the things that you do as an athletic trainer is when you're working someone back into their sport. So after they've been injured and you've worked on them from a rehab standpoint in the athletic training room, then we gradually work them back into sport. And so it's important to be able to look at their sport and say, okay, I know that this is where you want to be. So to get there, I need to break these skills down, and I need to let you do some drills, but not all the drills and those types of things. So you have to spend some time learning the sport in order to be successful. So I definitely spend time learning about every sport that I have worked.
Of course, throughout your career so far, what has that been like? Obviously, getting to work with the female sports like field hockey, lacrosse, gymnastics, and now volleyball.
Yeah. So when I worked gymnastics, it was definitely different, right? Definitely a different sport, whole new set of rules and regulations, and they, they're their own. It's a team sport, but an individual sport at the same time, and so that was really different. And so experiencing that, and then I relied pretty heavily on the coaches also, because in order to help me break down skills when you're returning people to activity. And so that was very interesting. Gymnastics challenged me from an injury standpoint more than any other sport that I have ever been challenged. I mean, as an undergraduate, I worked football and baseball and all those kinds of things. And even as a graduate student, when I worked men's lacrosse, it was, there's a lot of injury in men's lacrosse. So you see a lot of injury, but the gymnastics injuries are very challenging, and they have a lot of back injury, and so I took a lot of continuing education types of classes, because they really challenged me, and so I grew probably the most professionally as a clinician while I was working gymnastics. I did probably the most amount of research and the most amount of continuing education, and so that was really good. That was really good for me. And then now that I've transitioned into the volleyball team, it was funny because I went from like the shortest women, right? The shortest, smallest women on campus, to some of the tallest women on campus. I mean, they would even compete with the women's basketball team for being some of the taller women on campus. So it was definitely different. And again, like a new set of rules and a new set of things to think about, and some new challenges in terms of the types of injuries that they have. I never thought that I would become as well versed in concussion as I am. Concussion in volleyball is a regular thing, and we definitely have had more concussions in volleyball than I anticipated when I first took over as their athletic trainer.
What are some of the things that you took over as an undergrad with concussions working in football that has helped you with working in concussions now as a head athletic trainer?
Yeah, so I think that that's a really interesting question, because I would tell you that when I was an undergraduate and I was working football, that was back in the early 90s, and there was concussion, but it wasn't talked about in the same level that we talk about it now. And so I would say, and I learned a little bit about concussion in that environment, but I would say I learned more about concussion through going to continuing education types of things than I did clinically working football in the early 90s. Just because it wasn't something that we knew as much about. It wasn't something that we talked as much about. And now we know so much more about it, and we're so much more aware of what the signs and symptoms are and how to manage it, that how we manage concussion today is completely different than how we managed it back then.
Of course, what are some of the things that you do to prepare for game days as a head athletic trainer?
Yeah, so on a typical game day, we usually have we're going to have pregame meal, right? So we go with the team to wherever it is that they're going to have pregame meal. So we have pregame meal, and then after meal, we then have hours in the athletic training room where any of the athletes can come in, they get treatment. So there can be any number of things that we do from a treatment standpoint. And then anybody who needs to be taped, we tape them, and then they begin their warm-up process, and kind of as they're getting dressed and those kinds of things, then we're setting up the court or the field. Now, so for volleyball, the setup does not take long. So we just have a couple of coolers, like 2 coolers of water, 2 coolers of Gatorade, a cooler of ice. The setup does not take a long time. If you're talking about setup for a football game, you're going to set up the field before you go to pregame meal, because there won't be enough time for you to do treatment, and then all the guys are going to be on the field. So depending on how long your setup takes, you can either do that, while they're getting dressed in the locker room, getting ready to come out for warm up, or you have to do that before. So for volleyball, we can do it because there's not a ton. And usually a lot of times what we do is the day before at practice, we usually get all the coolers kind of set up, and then that way we can just add ice to them in the mornings, right? And right before the game, we just add some ice, and then it's already all set up for us.
Of course, what are some of the things that you do to prepare for game day at home that you don't do when you go away to compete?
Yeah, so game day at home includes all of that setup of water and ice, and then greeting the other athletic trainer. And then at home, we have to make sure that we have all the emergency equipment that we need, and it is prepared and ready to go at a moment's notice. So when I'm at a visiting place, I still review the emergency action plan for that place and talk with the athletic trainer there. But when I'm at home, if there's an emergency, I need to know and make sure that AED is working. We have a whole emergency kit that we have that has oxygen and suction and splints and all of those kinds of things. And so we need to make sure that all of that is ready. And then the other thing that we do from an emergency standpoint is we have an emergency action plan, but we also prepare the event staff. So I have a particular individual that is part of the event staff, and I have a sign that we usually use, or I tell them that we need the ambulance. And so if for some reason we need something, then the event staff, so we call it a medical timeout, and we do it right at the very beginning of before every home game. And so we kind of meet and we just talk about who's in charge of what and who's doing what, in case there's an emergency that happens. And that is really different. I mean, certainly the like water and Gatorade and all that kind of stuff is important, and everybody wants to have that. But for us, we want to make sure that we're ready to go if someone gets injured on the court or there's an emergency, and we need to be able to know who's in charge and what we're doing.
Of course, what are some of the things that you do during practice when you're with the teams in practice?
So it depends on whether or not, I mean, a lot of times I'm watching practice, and it depends on whether or not I'm rehabbing someone. So if, for example, someone is injured and I'm going to be working with them on the sidelines to do exercises while they're at practice. Because one of the things we know is that athletes have a pretty demanding schedule. So they're student athletes. They're in class, they have to study, they have meetings, they have weights, they have practice, right? There's all of these things that they have to do. And so we try to maximize their time. So if they need extensive rehab and they're not going to be practicing, then we try to do that rehab at practice. And so we are incorporating strength and conditioning types of exercises for them. We might be doing range of motion exercises. Sometimes I will have them over on one of the other courts, and we're having them, like for volleyball, for example, we're having them what they call pepper back and forth. I might have a setter working on setting. It just depends on what it is their position is. And then sometimes I can incorporate that with their with practice. So I might be then looking at what the drill is at practice and say to them, okay, you can go in and you can do part of this drill because I want to gradually return you to practice. So we don't do what I call going 0 to 100. Right. So it's not like somebody gets, for example, like let's say you're in a boot, right? Because you had some kind of stress reaction or something. So you're in a boot, and I am not going to take you out of that boot and then let you go to practice 100%. Because what's going to happen then is you're just going to overload again, and you're just going to get racked back in that boot because your calf isn't prepared to go back. Your body's not prepared to go back. And so what we do is, right, we're going to take you out of the boot, and then we're going to gradually return you by gradually working you back into practice, increasing your strength, increasing your endurance, and then we let you go back. Then I'm decreasing the chance that you're going to end up back in that boot again. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing in practice in order to work people back into doing their sport.
Of course, as a head athletic trainer, what is that feeling like being first on the scene to help those athletes when they do get injured?
So it's one of those things that I think you have to have a certain kind of personality to do it effectively. The field, an example comes to mind. There was a field hockey player. So one of the things about field hockey is the ball, if you're unfamiliar, the stick's really hard, and it's a composite stick. It's made of part of carbon fiber, and so it's composite material. And so the stick's really hard. The ball is also really hard. It's not rubber. It is a hard plastic ball. It's hollow, but it's hard. And so inevitably what would happen every single field hockey season, every single one, someone would break some sort of finger or some bone in their hand or something because it got whacked with the stick. And someone would have some kind of facial injury, because the ball is not supposed to go up, but every now and then it would, and it hits somebody in the face, and then it's going to create some problem. So anyway, there was a scenario where one of the field hockey players, she got her finger caught between, her stick and someone else's stick. And so, she lost the tip of her finger. It got cut off. And so she comes over and she says, Meredith, and of course it's bleeding. I was like, oh, okay. So we just cover it up, right? Stop the bleeding. And I'm like, okay, everybody needs to stop. We need to look at this person's finger. We need to try to look for it, right? You got to look for it. So hopefully they can reattach that part. So we did find it. And one of the things that the field hockey team always said to me is they said, you just acted like that was no big deal. And I said, well, what good does it do anybody if you guys are looking to me to manage the situation and I panic? Like, that is not what you're supposed to do. So in terms of initial injury management, if you are if you try to plan, and if you have a plan in place, an emergency action plan, if you feel confident in your skills, then when you go out on the field, you don't panic, you manage the situation, and then we get them off the field. And I can tell you that in the couple of scenarios where I have managed emergency situations, like spine boarding someone, like the very first time I spine boarded someone, I did the whole thing. We went to the hospital. I did the whole thing. And then once I got home, I bawled my eyes out, right? Because I was like, that was terrifying. But it doesn't help anybody if I'm doing that in the moment, right? So you focus on what it is you need to focus on, and the athlete is who you need to focus on. And I think one of the coolest things about being an athletic trainer is I know these athletes before they ever get hurt. I know their personalities. I have a working relationship with them. And so I know they trust me, and they know that I'm going to try to take good care of them.
Of course, how are you able to balance your work life as an athletic trainer and your life outside of being a head athletic trainer?
That's a good question. I have a really great support system. So like I said before, I do have some graduate students, and so they help me to balance some of that out. I at times prioritize my family, and so that I don't miss baseball games and swim meets and jump rope competitions that my kids were involved in. I also have a really great partner in life, and he's understanding and knows what I do and values what I do, and as a professional. And so it's a trade-off. And there are some times when I've been away with a team, and I'm not there. And so, he's there, and he's sending me messages and telling me how everybody's doing. And then there's other times when he would be traveling with his work, and he would be doing that too. And so I think, I think if you can get people to trust you as a person and show that you can work hard, and people are willing to work with you, and that, I think, is a valuable skill. And I think it's also important to tell your kids what it is you're doing, right? This is what I'm doing, not just I'm going to work, but this is what I'm going to work to do. And sometimes there's definitely times when I have taken my kids to work, and they enjoy being in the athletic training room. And everybody who brings their kids to work, they always build an obstacle course in the athletic training room. It happens every single time. It's always hilarious. And so I think my kids know and appreciated, kind of what I did and what I was doing. But I had help, right? I had help from my colleagues. I have help from my spouse. I have help from my kids. And so that has enabled me to be successful and to kind of manage the juggling thing.
Of course, how have you been able to have where being a mother and also being a business person in athletic training?
Yeah, I always say, actually, that if somebody made me choose, if someone made me choose, I would have chosen being a mom, because I love being a mom, and I'm very proud of my kids. They're grown. Now they're both in college, and so I don't see them as often as I used to, obviously. And I'm very proud of them. And I would have chosen them every time, just because I think my kid, I love being a mom, and I think that's an important part of my life. But I also like my job, and I have enjoyed my job, and there are times when you're balancing that, and I think you have to show yourself grace. I think women in general need to support other women. Women tend to be kind of judgmental of each other, and we need to not be that way. And I feel like it's my job, now that I'm older and I'm in a more administrative role, and more of a leadership role, that I try to continue to make the job better and to make that balance better. And one of the things that I think as athletic trainers that we don't do is that we don't ask oftentimes enough, and we don't say, you can't change practice plan. Probably the biggest problem we have is I would always be totally good until some coach would decide that they want to change practice time. And that would send me over the edge. I'm like, wait a minute, I just organized my whole world. I got everything under control, and now you're going to just change the time? No, you can't change the time. And so I think sometimes we're not, as athletic trainers, sometimes we're not super great at saying, no, you can't change the time. And I got to the point where with many of the coaches that I worked with, that they would call me and say, I'm thinking about changing practice time to this time. Are you okay with that? And that's all I would ask. And 99% of the time I would say, yes, I'm totally fine with that. Why? Because I just wanted to be asked. And that makes you feel a little bit better about your work-life balance. But it can be challenging. I mean, it can be challenging at times, but as I said, I rely on the people around me and feel like I've kind of carved out a good space.
Of course, what are some of the things that you do to help you where once you are in work, where you can leave work at work and then come home and be with your family?
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't think I ever entirely leave work at work. I'm still at home with my family, but the one thing about being an athletic trainer is that if some emergency happens and one of the athletes needs me, they can always get me, and my cell phone is always with me, and that's just the nature of the beast. It's always like that. Now, fortunately, I have a small team of volleyball players, maximum 19, 20 student athletes. And so that doesn't happen a whole lot, but sometimes it does. And sometimes they send me messages in the evening and those kinds of things. I can say one of the things that I did pretty regularly is I would leave work and be home for the kids to be on the bus. Because practice would be in the morning. Many times practice was in the morning. So like right now, a volleyball team practices in the morning. But if I would leave work and be home for the kids on the bus, then what would happen is then I would be with them and cook dinner and go to all of their activities and those kinds of things. And then when it became like 8 o'clock at night and they're going to bed, then I'm opening my computer and answering emails and grading papers and doing all of those things that as a teacher that you do and you need to do, and preparing lesson plans and that stuff. So I've kind of been able to kind of chunk up my day. So sometimes I would work early in the mornings, sometimes, so that then I could be with the kids to drop them off at school or to volunteer in their classrooms and then go teach my own classes. And, so I think you can kind of chunk up your day a little bit, and that kind of helps, because as my day, I do have a fair amount of flexibility in where I am and kind of what I'm doing, minus when practice time is, and that's pretty much set.
What are some of the things that you learn now that you didn't know before becoming a head athletic trainer?
I think that one of the things that I realized that I think you don't necessarily know right at the very beginning is, and what I have hopefully continued to grow in this area, is just your people skills. So your ability to communicate with people and how important communication is. And I think early on, you kind of feel like, okay, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to evaluate patients. I'm going to do the thing that I do. And then I'm going to go home. But there's a lot of communicating that happens, a lot of communicating with physicians. So if a physician sees one of a volleyball player, one of my athletes, then I'm gonna need to communicate with that physician about what's going on, what can they do, what can't they do, did we get a prescription, are they going to get an MRI, are they got right, like, so there's a lot of communicating that happens that that I think you don't really realize how important that communication is, and the value of that communication, and the value of your ability to communicate with coaches. Because when you have to take someone out of a game because they're hurt, coaches don't like you. They just don't. They can love you. They can love you off the field and have a tremendous amount of respect for you off the field. But when you take someone out, they're not going to be happy with you generally. And that's why it's important to have an athletic trainer there, because a coach won't take someone out on their own. Most of them won't, right? It's a conflict. They need, their goal is to win. My goal is to keep athletes safe. And so they're not going to really like you very much. And you just have to learn how to manage that. You have to learn how to communicate that, and you have to learn how to get them to understand why it's important that this person is not participating. And one of those things that I have learned is to listen to your gut. Because if you are worried about, when you go back to, and you put somebody back in a game and you say they're ready, you need to not be sitting there at the sidelines worried about what's going to happen. You need to have confidence in that anything could happen and that kid is going to be okay. If you're sitting there worried about what's going to happen, then they shouldn't be out there.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to become athletic trainers, whether on the collegiate or professional level?
So my advice is just make sure you know what you're getting into, right? Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you know what the role is. What does an athletic trainer do? Go shadow an athletic trainer. Just make sure you find out what it is that an athletic trainer does, so that you know what it is that you're doing.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to become head athletic trainers for a collegiate program?
You need collegiate sport. Once you get your board certification, right? Once you become certified, once you become licensed as an athletic trainer, you need collegiate sport experience, because as you move along in the world of, and you want to move up in collegiate sport, that's what you're gonna need. And the more collegiate sport experience that you can get, the more you're setting yourself up to be successful.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find your contact at?
So you can contact me through my email. My email is mbusby, mbusby @email.unc.edu. If you just type in Meredith Petschauer, UNC, my bio shows up, and I'm sure my email is there as well.
Thank you again, Meredith Petschauer, for your interview, and best of luck in your future as the head athletic trainer at UNC Tarheels.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Meredith Petschauer, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.